Now, the Moodle2Go project, I had two parts to it, one of which was the development of material. Some of the material was video based, some of which was going to be kind of quiz questions. But the second part of the Moodle2Go project was a way of sharing that material among three VLEs, and the focus of the project at that point was going to be using Moodle's MNet authentication in order to essentially bounce students from one VLE to another VLE, so that if it was a group of students from Annie's Land and the material they were able to access was going to be on the Cardonal VLE, there wasn't going to be a need for us to create new accounts or anything for them at that point. They could just actually click on a button and go and access the material in a separate VLE. And I said the other part of it was actually creating a workflow in terms of creation of kind of video-based resources, and at that point we were looking at kind of small chunks of kind of learning materials, demonstrations from lecturers. But also reinforcement of learning through like e-assessment and quizzes on the VLE. At the time there was a sort of kind of twofold impetus for the Moodle2Go project. One of which was the fact that at that point the three colleges hadn't merged, but we knew the merger was happening. So there was going to be a need for us to find ways of sharing material on the three separate VLEs amongst our existing student body. But the second part of it was, at that time we were becoming more and more aware of the fact that students were coming in and trying to access VLEs on their mobile devices, on their smartphones, and really what we were trying to do at that point was trying to kind of find an effective way for students to be able to access material on the VLE, on the smartphones, and make sure it's the right type of material for them to access on the phones. One of the biggest challenges, first of all, was that when we decided to start creating video material, we had said, right, we need to make sure the video material is going to be working on both Android devices and iOS devices. And at that point we decided we would make material available on the H.264 standard, and tested it out initially. Worked great in Android devices, worked great in iOS devices. And then Android did a series of upgrades, and all the video material that we created at that point no longer worked on Android devices. The second barrier we actually had was to do with the MNet authentication, and when we experimented with that a little bit, we kind of realised that the way that MNet worked within Moodle involved a lot of administration on each of the separate VLEs, which was actually going to make it unfeasible for us to use it in any kind of large scale. It was fine for small projects like this, but it wasn't going to work on, you know, a college-wide basis. It's had a lot of impacts actually since the project itself, not so much in terms of the material that we created at the time, but other things we found as we developed the project. First of all, I mentioned the fact that we had real problems with the MNet authentication. What we've started working on as a result of it is a method of using the Moodle Community Hub to actually share material between different Moodle sites. And what we're looking at just now is a method of using Moodle MNet authentication side by side with external database enrolment to basically allow students to find course material on the Moodle Hub, and not just to preview it the way the Moodle Hub currently works, but actually to enrol themselves on a course on another site using a combination of the two. And we wouldn't have actually ever looked at that if we hadn't been doing the Moodle2Go project. Secondly, when we were doing a lot of the video material for the Moodle2Go project, obviously we were looking at different technologies that would allow us to create video material in just the right format for Android and iOS devices. And one of the things we actually looked at through that was actually the app for iOS devices, which at that time was the Coach's Eye. And because we had looked at that as part of the Moodle2Go project, our sports and rec people have adopted it, and it's now, I've had lecturers come to me saying this has completely changed the way that I teach. And again, that's probably something we would never have looked at and identified if we hadn't been doing Moodle2Go. At the beginning of the project, I think first of all we kind of tend to make an assumption that, you know, it's, if we build it, they will come. And I think we did tend to make that assumption that students were going to be willing to use their own devices to access material. We did a survey at the beginning of the project, which I think something like nearly 200 students across the 3 sites responded to say that, yeah, they would be willing to use their own devices to access material. But when we started piloting material within some of the subject areas, a lot of students were quite reticent to actually use their own devices within a college setting. So I think if there was anything I would do at the beginning of the project now, it would probably be a need for a much more comprehensive survey of our students, and, you know, to say, look, do you think this would be a good idea? If we build it, will you use it? So yeah, I think that's the main thing I would change.